What's up? My name is ggforgoblinguide, and today we're going to talk about 5 tips and tricks to become a better burn player. Let's get started. So, as a small reminder, if you don't know me, my name is ggforgoblinguide. I started a YouTube channel focused on modern burn. If you want to see content of modern burn every single week, consider subscribing to my channel. As for this video, I wanted to make this video because I saw that some of my subscribers were beginners with Boros Burn, and I just wanted to tell you all my tips and tricks that I found throughout my 5 years of experience playing the deck. So let's get started with tip number 1. So before we go to tip number 1, just wanted to make a quick little note. Let's say it's a tip number 0. Before you go to an event with burn or every other deck there is, that's why it's not really specific to burn. Try to know your deck by heart and all the sideboards that you need for every matchup. If you find this very difficult to remember, there are a lot of good sideboard guides on the internet that you can print. So that's very important to know if you want to become a burn master. So let's go straight away to tip number 1. Alright, so tip number 1 with burn is know how to mulligan. A very good trick that I learned throughout my years playing burn is that a hand with 10 points of damage is what you want. Most of the time you're going to have hands with 2 lands and 5 spells, which is a good burn hand, or 3 lands. And you want to deal 20 damage to your opponent. So a line that has below 10 points of damage for burn is not great. Most of the time you're gonna lose the game because you're gonna end up drawing like burn land. That's your typical draw. So I think most of these hands you want to mulligan if you have like 5 lines. If you have like 4 lines with like Goblin Guide, Eidolon, a Lightning Bolt, and one of your land is like a Sunbay Canyon, I could see that you keep this hand. Or the second reason that I'm going to say is that your creatures are the most powerful cards in your deck. Eidolon, Monastery, and Goblin Guide are by far the most powerful cards in burn. So you want to check for those opening hands with your creatures, with a double creature, like Goblin Guide. And you want to favor those hands because your guides, your monastery, and your eidolon can sometimes just win the game on the spot when you play them. Goblin guides, eidolon can sometimes do 10 points of damage. Most of the time you're gonna try to go for like 4. 4 is like a good number. Higher than that, 6, 8 is like very good. But sometimes eidolons against Storm, against Blue-Eyed Control can just win the game. Goblin against Tron can sometimes just win the game, so that's very good. So keep in mind your creatures are very good in your hands. Lastly, burn is a 19 to 20 land deck, so most of the time you're gonna have to settle for 1 landers. It's not great, but you can always ask yourself, if I keep this hand with only 1 land, and if I draw my second land, let's say by turn 2 or 3, will I win the game? And if the answer is probably yes, then you want to keep this hand. All of these one-landers are going to see a lot of creatures if you keep them, because that's the one-landers that we usually keep. One-landers with like double Goblin Guides, double Monastery Swiftspear, and Lightning Bolt, Rift Bolt, and stuff. On the draw, usually these kinds of hand, you're gonna want to keep them. One-lander with Goblin Guides. On the play, it's gonna depend. Do you know what your opponent is playing and what is exactly your hand? That is going to depend. But that is, for the most part, hard to mulligan with burn. So let's go to tip number 2. Alright, so for tip number 2, we have know all the cards that can easily beat burn. So those type of cards are gonna be a card that takes our resources away by gaining a life or just discarding them or countering them. Gaining life is of course the best way to beat Burn because it's a deck that doesn't have a lot of resource, and gaining life, every time you gain 3 life, your opponent is pretty much discarding you a card. So cards like Wither the Storm, Timely Reinforcement, Thragtusk, Collective Brutality, Wormhole Engine, and then a lot more are cards that you have to keep in mind as a Burn player to remember when or how to use your Skullcrack properly. So these cards you're gonna have to keep in mind, and these are cards that you cannot find in a sideboard guide. You're gonna have to learn them. So other cards that can stop us from winning with our creatures or gain life are cards like that have protection from red, like Burrin's Forgetender or a Champion and Core Firewalker. Those type of cards, you have to keep that in mind in which deck plays those cards, because you're gonna want to bring your Path to Exile to beat those cards. Finally, there's cards that serve a strategy, cards like that are taxing or spells like Trinity Sphere or Thalia. Those type of cards are very annoying as a Bird player because it stops us from being able to cast every burn we have in our hand, and our opponent during that time can do whatever they want to. And finally, as in little mention, a new card that came out 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago, the Fairy Time Raveler. Those types of cards, Fairy or cards like a Leyline of Sanctity or Witchbane Orb, are going to be cards that stop you from doing a main thing that Burn is trying to do. So Leyline of course stops you from being able to cast Burn spell to your opponent. So you have to bring enchantment removal or win with your creatures. And Teferi stops us from being able to cast instant speed spells at the end of my opponent's turn. That's very, very annoying as a Burn player because you always want to pass turn, use your spells at instant speed. You don't have to use your spell at sorcery speed if you don't need to. Specifically, if you have a Skullcrack and a Boros Charm in hand and your opponent is playing Timely Reinforcements. So you have to know all of these cards because these are cards that can easily beat Burn. You have to know which deck are playing them and how to beat them. So let's go to tip number 3 for Boros Burn. Alright, so tip number 3 with Boros Burn is to know when to fire off your Burn spell. So as a Burn player, you have to know when is your window to fire off a Burn spell. So keep in mind that Burn has a lot of instant speed spells at his disposal. So you can always cast your spell at the end of your opponent's turn or at their upkeep. You don't have to cast a Burn spell if you're not forced to. What I mean by force is that you can get Inquisition of Kozilek. You're gonna want to play your Lightning Bolt in response, or if your opponent plays a Fairy Time Raveler in response, you can play Lightning Helix, and so on. So at the end of your opponent's end step is always a very good moment to play your Burn spells because you don't want to play your instant speed spells as sorceries, and at the end of your opponent's end step, well, you want to cast a spell most of the time. So sometimes you're gonna want to be patient with your Burn spells. So you don't want to hold a Skullcrack or hold a Lightning Helix or Searing Blaze. You don't have to cast your Burn spells even if you're losing mana. Even though you're an aggro deck, you don't want necessarily to cast your Burn spells every time against every matchup. For example, if you have an Eidolon to play against a Mirror Burn, you don't want to cast 3 spells and lose 6 life into the Mirror, because you can end up losing the game because of that. If you're playing against Death Shadow, you don't want to cast all of your Burn spells at the start of the game because they're going to have a big shadow. You can wait to cast them. If you're playing against Blue-White Control, if you're in top deck mode, you don't want to play one spell at a time. You want to hold all your spells and then play all at the same time so they cannot counter everything. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Also, if you know you're playing against Etron or John, you have to cast your Burn spell before they play a certain card. So if you know you're playing it against John, you want to cast your Burn spells before they play cards like Inquisition or Liliana of the Veil, because you're gonna lose them. So you'd rather play double Lava Spike than just a single Lightning Helix. You want to be efficient with your mana when you're playing against John. When you're playing against Etron, you want to cast spells that cost 1 first, like a Lava Spike over Rift Bolt, even though in most matchup you want to cast your Rift Bolt first. If you're playing against Blue-White Control, you want to cast your Rift Bolt first before Lava Spike, because you don't want a Teferi to block the Rift Bolt. That's a thing you always have to keep in mind when you're firing off your burn spells. So let's go to tip number 4 with Boros Burn. Alright, so for tip number 4, we have use your creatures properly. Like I said before, your creatures in Boros Burn are your most important cards, so you have to use them properly. If we take Goblinguide, for instance, his trigger can be sometimes a drawback, but sometimes it's actually an advantage. Every time you see a card that Goblinguide reveals to you, keep that in mind. That is actually a very, very good advantage. That is why Goblinguide is one of the most powerful cards in aggro decks. The trigger reveals you which deck you're playing against, so it's going to help you guide your turn 2. So always remember that guide is your best friend, and GG for Goblinguide, right? So after that, we have Monastery Swiftspear. Swiftspear is only a 1/2 compared to Goblinguide, but has the potential to go very, very big. So remember that your Swiftspear can trade with other creatures or can go bigger than them and can do a lot more damage. So when you go to the combat, remember to think about which blockers your opponent might do. And remember that your Swiftspear can often go to a 3/4 and sometimes a 4/5 with Rift Bolt and stuff like that. So remember that Monastery Swiftspear could be a very big creatures, and sometimes can like trade off with a Tormagoyf or another big creatures that your opponent may have. After that, we have Eidolon, which is, I think, one of my favorite cards in Boros Burn. It's a very powerful card. Eidolon is almost always being played on turn 2, but remember that Eidolon has a little neat ability that your opponent has to pay 2 if they want to play a spell that costs 3 or less. So if you're in the end of the game, sometimes just playing an Eidolon, if let's say your opponent doesn't play a counter spell, and they're gonna be like at 4 or at 2, it can just lock them out of the game, and that's why Eidolon is so powerful. Also, another thing to remember that can happen often is that if you're on turn 2, you have Goblinguide turn 1, and you have an Eidolon turn 2, you could play your Eidolon before combat, but I don't think it's a great idea. I'd rather play it after combat, specifically if you want your Eidolon to stick to the battlefield, because your opponent might just lightning bolt the Goblinguide, and then you can put an Eidolon to play, and if they don't have another removal spell, they might be in a big trouble. So that's why good players that play against Boros Burn will often take the 2 damage and wait for us to play the Eidolon after, and then when we play the Eidolon, they lightning bolt the Eidolon. So keep in mind that it's a very important play to remember, because if we just play the Eidolon, in response they can bolt the Goblinguide and we lose 2 damage. If rather than just bolt the Eidolon, well, we know, like, it always reveals the information if the Eidolon is good against their deck or not. And after that, your creatures are like very good early game, but most of the time late game they're not gonna be great. So use them as chump blockers. Your creatures can often gain you 4-5 life very easily. So always remember that your creatures are not that sometimes they're gonna be like not very good top decks, but sometimes they're gonna give you an extra turn to just chump block, and then you can lose your lightning bolt. So sometimes just play them as chump blockers is always very powerful. So that's it for creatures. Didn't want to go in more details with the creatures because I could go forever, because there are a lot of more specific plays that you can do with your creatures. But I think the video is becoming a little too long, so I'm just gonna go to tip number 5. So my 5th and final tip to understand of how mastering burn is actually, could be a surprise for you, but I think it is to play other decks than burn. Of course, to master a deck, you have to play it a lot to its full potential, to understand every single matchup and stuff like that. But I think unless you play those other decks, you'll never properly understand the matchup. Because if you're only seeing from one perspective, which is the burn perspective, you're not going to understand it from the human's perspective or the Azurus control one or Heliod company and stuff like that. So of course, you're not going to understand the deck like Blue-White Control. You don't want to necessarily to master Blue-White Control. You just want to play it a bit against burn, just to understand how the matchup works. And later, when you're gonna play your burn against Blue-White Control, you're gonna understand of which cards they might have, which answers they might do at certain moments, which is like the best thing for them to do. And by knowing the best thing for them to do, you can know which is the best thing for you to do against them. So my final tip is just to try other archetypes than burn. Just try them out. You don't have to play a lot of games with them, but just try them. Play against your burn deck, borrow it to a friend, borrow a Blue-White Control to a friend, and give your burn deck to them. Have some matches. That way you can understand properly how to play against the burn matchup. So if you like this video, if you like my tips and tricks on how to master burn in Modern, consider putting a little thumbs up. And of course, Magic is a very, very complicated game, so I cannot cover everything to how to master a deck. I just gave you my few tips and tricks on how I see burn. If you have other tips and tricks that you learn throughout your journey with burn, definitely let me know in the comment section below. We can talk about that. And if you want me to go more in details for certain things, I will be glad to answer your questions. And maybe later on, if you're interested, I could do a deck tech and a sideboard guide for Boros Burn. So it has been GG for Goblin Guide. I wish you the best of day or night, and see you next time. Bye bye.